First off, good afternoon and welcome to the Mental Health in the Workplace, Moving from Surviving to Thriving webinar. I'm your host, Sal Vergara, Vice President and Managing Director for HRQ. We're a national HR consulting firm providing services of HR retained search, interim and on-demand HR professionals, and full comprehensive HR consulting. First and foremost, special thanks to Alessandria Polizzi, or Al as we call her, Principal and founder of Verdant Consulting, for sponsoring the Roundtable series. Today, we've got a great panel, as you see here, and we'll have a candid conversation around why companies need to strengthen their focus on mental health, how biases against mental health show up in the workplace, and how to bring a more positive lens to addressing emotional well-being in the workplace, and what the roles of HR, of leadership, of employees is and is not. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce to you our esteemed panel. First off, as I mentioned before, Alessandria Al Polizzi. Al, if you would introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure, Sal. Thanks again for hosting. My name is Dr. Alessandria Polizzi. I am the founder of Verdant Consulting. I'm a former Chief People Officer who saw and experienced my own mental health crisis early this year and realized how little support and resources were out in the marketplace. And so I decided to apply my 30 years of adult learning experience to build a better solution. So I'm super excited for us to raise this conversation about mental health and emotional well-being in the workplace as an HR professional and as someone committed to this cause.
Excellent. Thanks again for founding this Roundtable series, Al. Next, we have Mr. Spencer Drango.
Thanks, Sal. Hi, I'm Spencer Drango. I'm a former Baylor football player and former NFL football player. I played for the Cleveland Browns and the Chargers, Los Angeles Chargers, not the San Diego anymore. But I have struggled with some anxiety in my transition moving from football back into the, workplace. I'm currently at Baylor, finishing my MBA.
Excellent. Thanks, Spencer, for joining us. Next, we have Mr. Greg Hake.
Thanks, Sal. Yeah, my name is Greg Hake. I did 22 years in the SEAL teams, and I've transitioned out of the military. I work as a director of operations for a pharmaceutical company right now, and I am getting my MBA as well, like Spencer. And just struggled with PTSD, traumatic brain injury associated with that, and then just reintegrating into society from that culture.
Thanks, Greg. We appreciate it. We have Dr. Philip Richmond.
Hey, everyone. My name is Phil Richmond. I'm a practicing veterinarian and the founder and CEO of Flourishing Phoenix Veterinary Consultants. I'm also the chair of the Florida Veterinary Medical Association's Professional Wellness and Wellbeing Committee. I'm grateful to be able to work on both a state and national level for mental health and well-being issues in the profession of veterinary medicine. And I'm here today. I was suicidal in 2008 with an alcohol and substance use disorder. It was the only tool in the toolbox. Was in inpatient treatment for 3 months and got the tools that I needed to really learn how to function well in this world and to enjoy veterinary medicine again. So I'm grateful to be able to carry that message to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And last but certainly never least, Kim Arnold.
Thank you for that. Hi, I'm Kim, and while I started my career actually in a clinical psychology setting as an experiential therapist, most of my career has been in human resources, talent development, and so I have kind of worked on the end of looking at mental health from everything from benefits through training and other ways that companies can help with inclusion.
Excellent. And Kim has served on a few panels of mine around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've got some history with each other. So we've got a great, looks like a great audience here. Let's get started. I encourage the audience to send in questions or comments along the way. We want to make this, it's fairly small and relative to other webinars we've done in the past. So if you've got questions or comments, please put them in the chat box and we'll try our best to address them and answer them. And I'd like to lay some context to this first question. So we'll get started. And it's not news that events over the past 2 years, such as the many impacts of COVID-19 on the workforce, there's been job loss, parents balancing work and virtual learning. That's hard in and of itself. Businesses closing down, combined with divisions on how we view basic human rights and justice. There is political divisiveness still, etc. All this has only increased stress, our anxiety, our burnout, substance abuse, and mental health diagnosis, including PTSD. And in fact, according to the National Center for PTSD, about 6 out of every 100 people, so 6% of the population, will have PTSD at some point in their lives. About 15 million adults have PTSD during a given year. And this is only a small portion of those who have actually gone through a trauma. And about 8 of every 100 women, 8% develop PTSD sometimes in their lives, compared to about 4% of every man. So 4 of every 100 men. So at the same time as this is all going through, we're seeing elite athletes like Spencer, celebrities, and many others openly discussing their mental health and the need for self-care. And that's provided new levels of awareness and opportunities. So, and there's an increased need, but also an increased openness to dialogue about something that usually makes us feel very uncomfortable. So Al shared how she shifted the focus of her own business. And we all on the panel have seen a shift in focus from other organizations that we're part of. What do companies need to strengthen their mental health focus? And why is that more important more than ever? And Al, we'll start with you, since you've really shifted your focus at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And one thing to think about, those numbers you shared, Sal, are really insightful. But here's another piece of information I'd like to share. In post-pandemic research, they did a study of 60,000 survivors of global disaster. And that's everything from 9/11 to the tsunami to the earthquakes in Mexico City. 44% of people who experienced that global disaster had PTSD symptoms up to 2 years afterwards. So if we look at our experience in the last 2 years, that's been the largest global disaster that has been experienced in history. And for context, the most deaths that have happened historically in the last 40 years due to global disaster was 450,000. We exceeded 7 million. And so that trauma alone is influencing and impacting the mental health of our employees, our coworkers, our citizens, our friends, our family, in a way that we just aren't fully prepared for and we haven't experienced in the past. And so that's why it's become so prevalent, because it's what happens when we experience trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And that those statistics are staggering. And not very many people are aware of that. And so putting that in context to what's actually happening, I think that's very valuable. Phil, you probably have stats, and I'll be honest, when Al and Kim approached me about hosting this, I didn't know that the veterinarian profession had such a high rate of suicide. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that in your own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's somewhat of a microcosm of what we're seeing in the general population, but specific to veterinary medicine. Unfortunately, it is true. So it's a little bit of semantics, but we have a higher risk of suicide. There's a study that came out in 2019 out of the CDC in Auburn and some other suicidologists, that veterinarians were 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. 2017 study, I believe, from the UK, veterinarians in the UK were 4 times more likely to die by suicide. Now, of course, as suicide is, it's multifactorial, but we select for our particular profession, select for perfectionism, high degree of empathy, and things that are challenging if we don't have, I think everybody on this panel would say soft skills is not the word we would love to use, but those types of skills of resiliency and that if we don't have those, we can't really make it very effectively in the world. And then add, a global pandemic And then the things that happened in the profession as well. It was, it's been a lot for us and for everybody. Yeah.
That's staggering. And it's also enlightens folks to what your people in your profession go through on a daily basis. So it's great to add acknowledgement to it and really amplify or augment the acknowledgement of the problem in that particular industry. Spencer, if we can switch to you real quickly, you'd mentioned your challenges from transitioning, and you and I had personal conversations around this when we first met, moving from professional sports and being an elite athlete to, transforming your life into the civilian life, so to speak. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your personal experience and what you're going through currently today.
Yeah. So, like Sal said, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, when I was transitioning from NFL to civilian life, so to speak, back to being a non-athlete, there was a lot of challenges in having my identity wrapped up in what I did instead of who I was, right? It's, football for me was a job. It wasn't who I am, right? And so a lot of that, having to separate those two things was huge. And so, obviously also I've always been a football player, right? I played for 20 years and then somebody said, no, you can't do that anymore. Like, you're not allowed to play anymore, and just kind of had that taken from me. And so that's one way to look at it. The other way is, I've chose to move on because I saw the opportunity to further, to step into the next chapter of my life. And so a lot of anxiety going through, the next chapter, what's next? And then, so seeking some professional help, which has a kind of a stigma around it. And you see nowadays where it's lessening that stigma, where that machismo of a professional athlete or, even a military veteran, you don't necessarily want to seek for help because it shows weakness in that field, speaking from the athlete side of things. And so to be able to reach out and say, hey, I need some help. And I think that actually shows strength and not weakness.
Absolutely. And as Spencer mentioned, there are a lot of similarities to the camaraderie and the sense of togetherness with the former military and also former professional athletes. Spencer and I, coincidentally, were members of a nonprofit called Merging Vets and Players. And it's a nonprofit started by a former Green Beret, Nate Boyer, and Fox Sports analyst. You'll see him on Sunday during Fox Sports, Jay Glazier. And so this group is meant specifically to help combat veterans and former professional athletes transition into civilian life. There are 7 chapters nationally. Dallas just recently opened in July, which Spencer and I were part of. I act as a career advisor for MVP. But statistically, there are 19 million military veterans in the U.S. today. That's roughly 10% of the adult population. And it takes a lot of energy to manage those emotions while trying to focus on their own work, their own performance. Spencer's going to school. And in a lot of instances, as Spencer alluded to, hiding their PTSD because it may scare people and or create stigmas or biases. We talked about that actually last night. Every Tuesday evening, we meet as a Dallas group. And as Spencer was alluding to, the machismo of professional athletes, both men and women, and especially in the military, where they're taught to stifle their feelings. And so maybe that's a good transition to you, Greg, as you're a former elite military operative. How was that for you? And what's your experience?
I mean, I think that there's a place for compartmentalization that is required within the role that you fill in the military, that there's just not, the mission is paramount and you need to do that. And it's just a question of when you do transition out and that support structure is removed, when you open up Pandora's box, how do you appropriately deal with it is the question. And I would contend that the current VA structure is just not able to support it. We've been engaged in conflict for the 2 decades, the longest sustained conflict in the history of the country. And we don't know definitively how that affects service members that have done multiple combat deployments. I mean, we have an idea, but we're very much in that discovery phase, and it's incredibly challenging, obviously, for people.
Sure. And you're an example of many men and women who are in MVP, not just the Dallas chapter, that have experienced things that we will never, ever see. And so, I think we all aspire to eliminating bias and stigma by normalizing mental and emotional well-being. So even though we may see in the media an increased openness talking about mental health and self-care, we talked about self-care last night. And examples of athletes: Solomon Thomas, Michael Robinson, Hayden Hurst, Joey Bosa, Kevin Love, Dak Prescott of the Cowboys. It'll take more than that to totally eliminate the biases in the workplace. And so my question to you folks is, how have some of you personally experienced or observed mental health biases in the workplace? And how can we bring a more positive lens to normalizing, addressing mental health in the workplace? Spencer, can we start with you?
Yeah. I think just the fact that knowing it exists and not ignoring it. People are struggling with things every day. And so it takes a certain, depends on your relationship with the person. But hey, if you know somebody's struggling or you see that they're struggling, reach out, because a lot of times they just need a friend or somebody to talk to or someone they can lean on. And then as well, just, know that everybody is going through something or other. And that if you are going through something, don't be afraid to reach out. It's not weakness to reach out for help, like I mentioned earlier. It's strength. There's power in numbers, and there's nothing new under the sun. And so somebody out there that you can get in touch with has gone through something that you've gone through or very similar. And so they can be there to just discuss things and kind of, this is how they handled it. This is how they wish they handled it. And there's a bunch of other resources out there as well, that can do it. I recommend, if you don't or never talked to them, go seek a therapist or just someone you can have a conversation with to discuss and process things. Because sometimes it's all it is. It's just the ability to process, like Greg mentioned, that support structure, just finding that support structure for yourself.
Absolutely. Greg, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I agree with Spencer from a proactive perspective, that when you are, as I refer to, in the depths, when you dive into that place, it's a lot. I would equate it to having Alzheimer's, is that you hand over the keys to something else and you're just kind of a passenger and don't have a lot of necessarily control, not from the perspective of that you have lost control, but you're very much not yourself when you're really, really in the dumps, if you will. And it's incredibly challenging. You don't want, for me, I isolate, I don't reach out. And I know other people within that space. I have a lot of former teammates that have that same problem. And you see someone kind of creating distance. That's when it's super key to not just give them space, but to just maybe go, hey man, how are you doing? What's going on? What's this experience like for you? How are your emotions showing up for you right now? And sometimes, like for me, there's no rhyme or reason behind it. Everyone's like, oh, loud noises, all that stuff. It's like, no, sometimes you've just been packaging things away for so long that there's no more room to put it, and it just spills out into your everyday life. So having that support structure where someone can say, hey, I know that you've struggled in the past. How are you doing today? Just that check-in can really, really mean a lot.
Absolutely. And even last night, some of the members were conveying the fear or the reluctance to reach out because fear of judgment, or they didn't want to burden someone else. And I think that's another thing that,
absolutely.
We just as a community, as human beings, we should be able to articulate and convey to people around us that not to stifle their feelings, and that it's just healthy. And I think to Spencer's point, it's inspirational to see and hear someone like Spencer or Greg or Phil pour out their feelings. And I think it provides inspiration for others to do the same thing. So they're leading by example. Al, what do you think about that?
Well, I think I have a lot to say about this, Sal, as you well know. But one thing to think about, there's kind of two things that come to mind. One, from an organizational point of view, is creating the psychological health and safety, the space to be your true, authentic self. And that isn't just a touchy-feely approaches. There's real structure that you can do within your organization to create a culture where openness and transparency is celebrated. And that's not just interpersonal interaction, but it's also organizational structure and environment. And so there's actual guidelines, global guidelines that the International Standards Organization came out with this summer that help make that a structure and not something that people have to figure out on their own. So that's one. The second for me, and this is like, if I could teach every leader one thing, it would be self-compassion. And self-compassion means putting aside judgment. It means speaking to ourselves with kindness. So that self-shame and metacognition, the feelings about feelings, those are the Achilles heel that really prevents us from being our true selves and being as resilient as possible.
Is it a true statement saying that when people open up to us, say if Greg calls me and just wants to vent, is it safe to say that not all the time they want an answer or for you to fix it, that they just need someone to listen to?
Yeah, very rarely. I mean, I don't know. I was just sharing with everyone, my 30th wedding anniversary was yesterday. And when I call my husband and he tries to fix my problems, it doesn't usually pan out well.
Yeah. So I think it's all very, for me, learning, being married myself, you can't always fix it. And then I've learned throughout the years that sometimes they just need someone to listen to them and be empathetic.
Yeah. But I think also, just if I could add one more thing real quickly, is that I think that people have a fear of their own feelings. And so that discomfort we have with admitting that we have emotions and not knowing how to process them often prevents us from understanding and creates a discomfort in the expression of feelings from others.
Sure. Absolutely.
If I may, I think, agreeing with Al, it's like reaching out is the hardest part. We get in our own way so much that we're worried about what this says about us or worried about what other people think about us instead of what we actually need as ourselves. Like, I need to go talk to somebody, but who cares what other people think? It's about what my mental health and what I'm going through and how it can best help me in that situation. You're allowed to be selfish when it comes to your own mental health, I think.
Yeah, of course. You are your own best advocate for sure. Absolutely. Phil?
Yeah, I mean, if I may chime in, I think
yeah.
From a veteran perspective, particularly within the team, so many people say, my problems in relation to other people's are not that great because you're surrounded by quite literally heroes that have done amazing things, multiple Medal of Honor winners awarded to the teams and stuff like that. And so you're like, oh, well, they've got problems, but mine are trivial, and you downplay your own symptoms, and then you just kind of isolate and just don't reach out.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I'd like to chime in because you guys are talking about, this concept of reaching out, right? And Al mentioned psychological safety. And I think from an internal perspective, if you're in leadership or in HR, one survey result that I looked at said that 68% of people surveyed actually said they feared impact to their job, career potential, performance reviews, those kinds of things, if they spoke up, right? So, until we can help employees feel that they have job security, that you can have a mental illness diagnosis, you be bipolar, people can be aware that you are, in recovery, an addict, or people have this knowledge about you, or you talk about your PTSD, and that it's not going to impact your career. And so there's a lot of us that are in positions when we're talking about talent, doing succession planning, and if there's this if the conversation goes into where you see that there's a bias against someone that has a known diagnosis, is to say something and step up and confront that bias. What I love about when you led with talking about all the elite athletes that have recently started speaking up about their mental illness, and we've got Greg and Spencer here. I think within an organization, what that would look like is your very credible, high potential talent, your people in top leadership actually speaking out and sharing their stories. and not being afraid to be transparent about perhaps their own diagnosis or their struggle, or just even talking about burnout or postpartum or different things like that. So, that may not be a long-term thing for them, but that they're experiencing, in the moment, because that is what it's going to take internally to help normalize this conversation.
For sure. And that's a great analogy for folks in just the business world. And we talked about, in COVID-19, leaders and managers were managing, work from home, and are you okay, Kim? But a lot of times people forgot about the managers themselves, that they're human beings too, and they forgot self-care. So I think that's a very good point. I want to make sure that we address some of the comments here in the chat section from Catherine and Sarah, and thank you, Matt, also. Catherine mentions her struggle with tempering the amount of empathy that she can afford to others and the strive for perfection. I think that's applicable for any profession, but I think it's amplified in that industry. And then Sarah, you said it sometimes feels like you get tagged if you admit you have mental health issues. To me, that blows my mind, and that's what we try to do within MVP, is to dispel that notion that you can't be your authentic self and not to stifle your emotions and the way you feel. I think that's the worst thing to do. And you asked, how do we change this? So that's a good segue to you, Phil. How do we change that?
Yeah, thanks, Sal. So I was, in reading Sarah's message, I responded to her, and it's exactly what I was going to share on. So to give you an example that I think is kind of gives an idea of the medical profession across the board. In 2017, the Mayo Clinic did a study on licensing applications for physicians. And on that licensing application, if there were questions regarding mental illness, physicians in that state were 40% less likely to seek mental health, to seek treatment. That is because of one question on a licensing exam. Now we know, because it becomes a fitness to practice issue. So, when we're doing surgery, when we're doing these things, that it's almost ingrained in us that we have to, not somewhat what Greg was saying, but that if you're the surgeon, you're it. Like and oftentimes there's nobody that's going to come in and finish that job for you. But what I was getting at is, in the state of Florida, we had 3 questions on our licensing exam that said that. So to get to the point, one of the points of what can we do about it, it's not as sexy, if you will, but some of these policy things that we can do right from the get-go. We were able to get the licensing application changed for veterinarians in the state of Florida and have those questions removed. And we lobbied the board based on the evidence. So that was very successful. But I agree too. It's also got to be top down. What's the culture? Is well-being honored as something that we should measure in our company, in our organization, in our hospitals? If it's not, if it's a box checking, like I think I saw Matt mention, like with the EAPs, if it feels that way to employees, team members, it feels like it's something to check the box off. So are we seeing the value in, protecting our workers and investing in well-being?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point in the segue. Mental wellness and well-being should not be perfunctory in terms of the assessment and the acknowledgement and ultimately the how to help folks. And Matt's comment here, firms can do better than their standard EAP. For those who aren't in HR, employee assistant program offering, there should be more in-depth conversations and possibly more an analysis of what EAPs look like, and probably need to recalibrate just based on what's happened the past couple of years. So there are a lot of folks here that I recognize, and not everyone is an HR role, but what is the role of leaders in general in an organization, HR folks, managers? And we alluded to this earlier in the call, but for those on the webinar who are in HR roles or leadership roles, or even someone who's an ally or an advocate, what is a role that we can play? And what is not in scope or not appropriate? So Kim, let's start off with you. And there's things that we want to do to help, but maybe we're not best equipped to do so.
Exactly. And that's really important, kind of what is not our job, coming out of where I started my career in a lockdown psych unit, you have to be trained to have an intervention, right, with someone that is really struggling. And we want to make sure that leaders, maybe because you've been through something yourself, I think it's great to be empathetic, but you're not a therapist. You're not, necessarily trained for that. And even if you have training, the workplace isn't the place to do it. You shouldn't be the therapist for someone. So I would say that's where, you need to, it's not your role. And if someone truly is in crisis, you need to keep them safe and the employees safe. And that may mean calling 911. But kind of in general, the things I think that you can do, the topic of benefits came up at EAP, Employee Assistance Program as a benefit. Companies do need to assess their benefits and see if they're being used, if they're being helpful. 79% of organizations in a SHRM HR organizations research said that they have EAP programs, but only 10% of the employees actually use them. We're spending a lot of money for something that doesn't seem to be helping. Employees, someone dealing with postpartum maybe needs a lot more flexibility. Someone that's going through kind of a crisis period needs different things. And it's not just always a therapist. So really looking at that and measuring that usage. I think when you look at your workplace programs, looking at what other organizations are doing, employee assistance programs, but also things like employee resource groups. You have where you bring other affinity groups together to kind of support each other, your Black Employee Network, your Women's Network. Companies now are having, employee resource groups supporting and having those conversations with where mental health is being talked about. Doing what you can to reduce that bias and stigma, confront it when you see something, say something, hold people accountable. It's actually a law. It's a law. Our under the Americans with Disabilities Act, we need to protect our employees that are struggling with a mental health issue. But I think Al said this. The basics is really treating people as human beings and showing that empathy and care, holding your managers accountable to that, make that part of your manager training is on, how to be empathetic, but draw that fine line between privacy and empathy when they want to have conversations with their employees. Managers can have some training around that. But also, even if the organization is not always doing it right and people mess up, if you can provide your employees just with some resiliency training, some skills in dealing with stress. I see Al nodding because she has a whole program on that. And it's important because then if no one else is even there for me, I can be there for myself if I have some knowledge and tools around that are really practical and not necessarily just therapy. So I'll pause there and let you others chime in.
Yeah, that's all great. And Coral and CS917659 have some really good comments here. Let me go to Coral real quickly. Leaders and managers need to recognize the workplace occupational psychological hazards. They should be trained in psychological health and safety for managers. They should be able to direct the employee who needs help, not providing the counseling. So kind of echoes what you're talking about. And CS917659, it's critical to discuss these things with leaders you can trust. Trust is key. And a good example of this is Emerging Vets and Players that Spencer and I go to on Tuesday evenings and just across the country. A lot of times, in fact, probably the common denominator for folks who thrive in this particular organization is the fact that they can trust the people in the room with whom they're basically pouring out their emotions. A lot of times vets, and I won't speak for Greg or Spencer, but from what I hear, is that they don't feel comfortable in talking to other people unless other people have been in their shoes. And so I think trust is key, and for sure within the business sense and in the business perspective, being able to convey that level of trust and earn it, so to speak, is paramount. So Greg, from your perspective, from your own personal experience in working within organizations, how does that ring true for you in terms of what would you like to see from your leaders and how people interact with you?
Yeah, I agree that it's very challenging. There's a saying that you move at the speed of trust, which can be challenging, especially when the person that you're dealing with isn't a veteran and
Right.
they don't understand what's going on with you, and it's difficult to relate to that outside of the veteran community. So that can be very, very challenging. But just extending the invitation for support is just a huge initial first step. It's just saying, hey, not trying to presume anything, but I'm
Right.
here if you need me. Like, that goes a long way.
Right. And something that I learned over the past few months is I always ask, well, why don't you talk to your spouse? Like, if you can't tell your spouse something, and I was just ignorant of that, that a lot of times the individual does not want to burden their partner with all that. It's a lot of heavy things that we hear. So it was a very educational for me to hear people basically explain, Greg, what you just said, and that trust is it's not necessarily implicit. Like, it's not necessarily assumed that you can trust your partner only because they feel like they're going to burden that individual. So I think that's something that everyone should give grace to, for those that are in the midst of an episode. Well, I shouldn't say an episode, but who are feeling depressed or emotional. Give grace to those individuals, like Greg said, and basically the panel, let them know that you want to lend an ear. Anyone else want to address that last question in terms of what is in scope? What should we do and what should we not do? Phil,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I have a point of view on that, obviously. So one is, I think, the mindset that emotions are an illness that needs to change. Everyone has emotions. We all have past histories. We all question. There are over 150 psychological distortions that our brains interpret what we see differently. So, while we should talk about mental health, emotions are not an illness. The other thing is that, Coral mentioned it, psychological health and safety, to the comment you made, Phil, about just changing something simple like a question on an application. There are mundane things like role clarity that can create psychological safety in an organization. It doesn't all have to be about interpersonal connection. And then the third is on the EAP use. I think we have this inclination to want things to be self-led and self-directed. And the problem is, if people are in burnout, two of the symptoms of burnout, cynicism and cognitive capability, prevent people from being able to be self-motivated, or at least they hinder that capability. So I think we have to go in eyes wide open as to what is realistic when it comes to people who are already in burnout.
Thank you for that. Spencer, Phil, anything to add?
Yeah, just quickly, I'd say it's kind of dovetails on it, and especially what Coral is involved in. I actually know Coral. She's a wonderful advocate for the veterinary profession. Is trauma informed workplaces, and what does that even mean? And to give you a quick example, so with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, not that we get too deep into that, but my own experience with our practice. I was in surgery with two of our technicians. They know what I do, and they got curious about it, and they felt comfortable and wanted to take that assessment. They took the assessment and had both of them. So if you have 4 or more of these, it significantly increases your risk for multiple things. 7 to 10 times more likely to have an alcohol or substance use disorder, 30 times more likely to attempt suicide. They took that, both of them, one of them had 6 out of 10, one of them had 7 out of 10. And just as someone in a leadership position, now this, not getting into the HIPAA, just getting into like more of a empathy-based, trauma-based workplace, I can see feedback through that lens, how they, they may take feedback some way or anything like that. And kind of like Al was saying, is just understanding what people that are in certain positions are going to, be in, and just saying, I may, and I may not have the answer to it, but I'm with you, and we'll find out.
It's just the simple act of saying that can be very effective, right? Well, we've referenced awareness training. We've talked about it here the last few minutes, and really skill building as something that HR and leaders can make available to employees. Al has done copious amounts of research and program development in this space. So I'm going to start with her. How can we help individuals or even help ourselves break through burnout and expand resiliency in simple, practical ways through building proven neurocognitive skills?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of big fancy words too. So it doesn't have to be that fancy. But really understanding the science of psychology and cognitive behavior theory and understanding ourselves and how people show up. It's just what Phil said, right? I call them stress styles. People respond to stress in different ways. Knowing that for yourself as a leader, but also for your team, just that knowledge right there, which is obviously something we cover in our classes, helps prepare you to be a leader and to help support others.
Sure. Spencer, you and I have talked about what you do personally to kind of alleviate the stress. What are some of the things that the activities or, techniques that you do?
Yeah, no, I use meditation a lot, and it's not, meditation has its own stigma about it. Like you need to be a monk in the middle of nowhere on a mountaintop, not talking for years. No, it's not. It's just, I use it as a way to reset. So I usually start the day, a 10-minute guided meditation. There's a ton of different apps out there. Headspace is one, Abide is another. And there's so many out there that you can go through. But yeah, you just put it on and it kind of guides you through, and there's different sets of, dealing with a certain emotion or dealing with anger or dealing with a loss of a relationship or something like that, different ways to kind of guide you through it, or just even some on focus. And it's a really good way for me to start my day off on a positive note, on a focused note that allows me to kind of tackle the day as I go forward.
Just a quick, from my own edification, do college sports or professional sports, do they offer that level of, hey, those kind of programs that you described, or even promote or encourage that?
Actually, yes. So with the Browns, we had a sports psychologist on staff, and he would help out with whatever you needed performance-wise, but also you could go to him with anything. So he was the one who turned me on to Headspace. And so you're seeing it more. And actually, with the Chargers, we did have a psychologist on staff as well. And so you're seeing it more within the NFL space. And I can only speak to the two teams that I was on. But it's becoming more of an open conversation with all the new research that's been out with concussion and other mental health disorders that come out of repeated hit the head with football.
Sure. And you mentioned meditation. We have actually two members within MVP that facilitate trauma-informed yoga and I-rest meditation. They do that for veterans, to first responders, to former professional athletes. And for me, in my opinion, it's important to simply cultivate a culture and an environment where people can truly be vulnerable without fear of ridicule or judgment. We talked about that earlier. And we mentioned this a lot, be sure to reach out to your fellow human being if you sense any shame or reluctance. If, kind of the old adage, if you see something, say something. I think that's very applicable here. We have a saying at MVP that I got your back, and the innocuous act of saying that, I think, speaks volumes to the recipient that hears that. I think it's incumbent that we help and that we become more knowledgeable and more empathetic to what people are going through. Phil, what are your thoughts on what you do? And especially, it's probably nuanced specific to your industry.
Well, what's great is all the tools work no matter, we're all human beings trained to do whatever it is we're trained to do. So all these tools work for all of us. And I love looking at it more of as a toolbox, Spencer was sharing about meditation. That's an amazing tool. And it's just, if all we were to do was meditation, and not that anybody does that, but if that was it, it probably wouldn't give us the level of well-being. So it's nice having multiple things in our toolbox, but the go-tos we always are going to have favorite go-to. So for me, it's gratitude practices. I can sit down, like things can be going bananas. I can go in my office. I have a journal next to my desk. I pull it out. I just start writing things that I'm grateful for until I feel better. And because I believe in that, what I'm writing down, it changes me. And then I go out and in, 30 seconds, I'm a different person that went in, and the world didn't change. None of the craziness that's out there didn't change. I did. And so it's, for me, as someone in recovery, since 2008, it changes my perception of the world around me faster than, a drink did. And so I'm, grateful for that tool. And then also, Al had talked about some of the tools, being able to challenge my thinking process. Like if Spencer doesn't, if I text him and he doesn't text me back, and then I'm like, oh man, he just, he probably thinks I'm a POS, like I didn't do this. And then I spiral down, and he's helping a turtle cross the road, like he's doing something great. And then I went through all of that like it actually happened. So just being able to, not experience things that we don't need to experience, but then giving, assuming good intent is another powerful tool that I've had.
Not to oversimplify what you said, but, positive mental attitude and then practicing what you preach. Assuming good intent, I think, is important, that we all forget. Greg, you've, yeah.
Okay, sorry, pipe in on that, but no. I do want to make sure that we also acknowledge the more negative feelings as well, and that because toxic positivity is real. And so there are a bunch of studies about pushing down what we would perceive to be negative emotions backfires on us very quickly. So it's looking for and accepting the world of realities, like Phil said, of what other ways, opposite actions can I look at to see the current situation as well.
Sure. And you bring up a good question or elicits a good question. Is it possible, an individual last night made the comment where he gets tired of hearing you're doing a great job or you're a fantastic job, and he doesn't necessarily believe it. So it has the inadvertent effect of negativity. Like he doesn't like to hear too much of it. Is that what you're referring to?
No, but that's probably another distortion, actually. But no, it's the resistance and feeling of control over negative emotions. So shoving down any kind of, like, if I feel sad, instead of saying, well, I shouldn't feel sad, so therefore I'm going to feel bad about feeling sad, or I'm going to pretend like I don't feel sad and have, positive vibes only. That actually decreases your well-being significantly versus in the acceptance commitment approach, which is I accept that I feel sad, and that is just one emotion. It doesn't define me.
Got it. Thank you for that clarity. Greg, in your experience, what do you do? You've experienced things that we'll never experience at the level of complexity. And what do you do in terms of making sure that you're self-cared?
I mean, there's a number of things that I engage in. I do meditation. I exercise, there's a lot of studies that show pound for pound that exercise is one of the best antidepressants out there. But for people like myself, it's a high mileage seal. Every labrum in my body is torn and multiple other injuries, and it's difficult to exercise sometimes. There's definitely meditation, exercise, engaging with friends, but something that's not often talked about, and I think should be brought to the forefront is plant medicine. I microdose psilocybin, and that helps. And that's a taboo subject today, but it really does help. And there's a lot of momentum within the special operations community behind this. And you can just listen to Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss when they talk about the benefits of that. And I've definitely experienced personal benefits from doing that. I'm off the anxiety meds that the VA pumps my way, and been able to really take control of my care from that perspective.
And it is all about kind of setting your own narrative, so to speak, if there's a better way of putting that, of your own self-care. And I learned a lot just by being around former vets here recently, is that the VA, I'm not here to dog on the VA, but I think that it sounds like there needs to be a recalibration of how people should be cared for.
I mean,
right?
I think it's a organization that has good people that want to help and is shackled by the regulations and restrictions that they are shouldered with. And they're just, they're maxed out for the patient population that they support, you know?
Sure, sure. There are a couple comments here from Iman. Nothing but real human emotions, an end to toxic positivity. And then Phil, that is a person versus process praise. Telling someone they're awesome or doing a great job can backfire and raises the bar. Better to say, I appreciated how you utilize your team effectively on the project today. Process praise is more effective to increase well-being. Thank you for that. That's very informative for me, because this individual was showered with praise, but was overwhelmed with it. And I think it backfired. So that's definitely something that I wasn't aware of. And then thank you, Greg, from Sarah, for putting that out there. There's so much research and potential for new treatments for mental health issues. I think it's conversations like this to get it out in the open, just like conversations with DE&I. And me personally, I think this particular topic falls under diversity, equity, and inclusion. We should be more inclusive of folks that have mental health issues or struggling with mental health, I should say. So I think definitely this is a platform from which we can grow the dialogue. And, you know, we're coming up to the end of the time. I wanted to take this opportunity to ask the audience if you have any questions or comments. One just popped up. Dorothy, could Greg repeat what he said about plant medicine? He mentioned a specific one, which I didn't get. So Greg, can you mention that again?
Sure. So there's a number of plant medicines out there. And I have participated in two particular ones. There is a movement within the special operations community to go on a journey, if you will, to confront PTSD. And I've done that in Mexico with ibogaine, which is the world's most powerful psychedelic. And if there's a lot of stigma behind that, people think that it's just a bunch of combat vets going to the desert to get high. It is decidedly not that, because it is, imagine having 1,000 hours of therapy crammed into a 12-hour session. And that's, I would say that's what you get with your ibogaine experience. And it's decidedly, it's very challenging. It's a life-changing experience. I've participated in that. And then from a follow-on perspective, to anchor that the downhill momentum, if you will, gained from that experience, I microdose psilocybin regularly, which is from a street term would be magic mushrooms, but it's not, it doesn't get you high. It takes your anxiety down. You don't go on a journey. But those are the two things that I have personally experienced. I know that there's a bunch of other things within the plant medicine and psychedelic space that help with PTSD and TBI. And I mean, this isn't, I would contend that for the combat veterans out there, that this is not your garden variety kind of PTSD that, you know, is experiencing from a broad perspective. And not to minimize what has happened during the pandemic, but the challenges that combat veterans face from multiple deployments is a little unique within the United States, which is great, because we've got this amazing bubble that is our country, and I'm so grateful for that. But the raw conflict that our combat vets has experienced is not something that is often seen within our society. And from a statistical perspective, we've been in the longest conflict. We've been in the longest sustained conflict of our nation's history, supported by the smallest population base, which is roughly, when I looked at the statistics, was 0.043% of the American population is a combat veteran in the global war on terror. And these people have been doing multiple deployments. Myself, I've done 6, which isn't that many comparatively. I know people that have done 13, and there's challenges associated with that. And meditation is great, so is exercise, but some of these things require some bigger guns. And I would contend, based on personal experience, that plant medicine is another venue. I would not advocate that it's a silver bullet, and I don't think that there's a silver bullet out there. I think it is a building a treatment plan that takes a lot of different assets and team members and support. My opinion, of course.
And thank you for sharing and being vulnerable about what you've been through, what treatments that you're trying and have tried. I think that was amplified these past few months, all politics aside, but with withdrawal from Afghanistan, that
it's very
reignited,
for sure.
It charged everyone, and within our own group that Spencer and I are in, with MVP, it elicited a lot of visceral emotion.
Yeah.
And so, we all should be cognizant of that. You see something, say something. If you see a combat veteran or a friend struggling, I think that's a clear sign. And some of these things trigger, pardon the term, it triggers those emotions. Last night, a gentleman was lamenting and really having a hard time with Sunday was apparently the 38-year anniversary of the Beirut bombing, where he had to pull some folks out. And so those things, those experiences, and not to minimize anything else within the veterinarian occupation, within, being a professional athlete at the highest levels, I think we all need to be empathetic about it. And I think it's conversations like this that amplify the need for all of us collectively to work on expanding the dialogue around mental wellness and mental well-being and self-care. And as I told the folks at MVP, there is strength in vulnerability. And the only way to normalize our culture to fully embrace that level of openness is to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And as these panelists have exemplified, it takes a lot of great fortitude and courage to not only seek out the help, but also embrace the support that's offered. If you or a loved one is suffering from depression, please don't go it alone. There are lots of resources that we talked about today that are ready and willing to be that ray of hope for you. So unless we have any other, let me notate here some of the comments. I joined this call to help me to be a better leader. While I have some great takeaways for that purpose, I also am reminded to take care of my own mental health. Thank you for saying that, because self-care is critical. Being empathetic, I need those reminders, or being an empath. Thank you to everyone for openly sharing. Thank you to all the panelists. Again, thank you, Matt. On behalf of Al, Kim, Philip, Greg, and Spencer, I'm Sal Vergara. Like this last comment, be kind to those around you, and most importantly, yourself. So we'll see you next time on the next webinar.